crazy world we're living in is such a touch-and-go time, a seesaw to and fro time.
Diahann Carroll was elegance, confidence, and history in motion. She was the first black woman to star in her own TV show. Not as a maid, but as a nurse, she shattered Hollywood barriers with her poise and presence. But behind the fame, the gowns, and the groundbreaking roles was a far more personal story, one that didn't make headlines. She had one daughter, and while the world saw a flawless icon, her child saw something much more complicated. Years later, that daughter would say, "My mother was beautiful, brilliant, and complicated. Being her daughter meant learning how to stand on my own." So who is Diahann Carroll's daughter? What was it like growing up in the shadow of a legend? And what happened after the cameras stopped rolling? This is the story of legacy, love, pressure, and what it means to grow up as the child of a woman who changed history. This is what happened to Diahann Carroll's kids. And if you are into classic Hollywood icons, amazing stories, and newly discovered insights, then hit that subscribe button. We are on our way to 10,000 subscribers, and your support will mean a lot to our channel. Before she was Diahann Carroll, the icon, she was Carol Diane Johnson, born in 1935 in the Bronx, New York. Her parents were working class. Her mother, a nurse, her father, a subway conductor. They believed in discipline, education, and hard work. From an early age, Diahann showed immense talent. She studied classical music and voice, and by her teens, she was already modeling and singing at local clubs in Harlem. Her beauty, her voice, and her determination set her apart. She entered show business in the 1950s, a time when roles for black women were scarce and stereotypical. But she pushed back, refusing to play maids, caricatures, or submissive side characters. In 1962, she became the first black woman to win a Tony Award for Best Actress in a musical for No Strings. And in 1968, she made history again, starring in Julia, the first American TV series to feature a black woman in a non-stereotypical lead role. She played a nurse and single mother, and it was revolutionary. But what the public didn't see was that off-screen, Diahann Carroll was navigating a complex private life. She had married jazz producer Monte Kay in 1956. He was sharp, creative, and deeply connected to the jazz world. But the relationship was short-lived. They divorced a few years later, though during that time, they had one child together. On September 9, 1960, Diahann gave birth to her only child, Suzanne Kay. It wasn't the storybook moment people might imagine. Diahann was juggling auditions, fame, and a crumbling marriage. Being a single mother in the spotlight wasn't easy, and for someone who worked relentlessly to break through Hollywood's glass ceiling, motherhood was both grounding and complicated. Years later, Suzanne would say, "My mother taught me strength, not softness. She raised me to be composed because that's what she had to be." As Diahann's career rose, so did the pressures of balancing motherhood with fame. And from an early age, Suzanne understood that she wasn't just being raised by a mother, she was being raised by a woman the world was watching. Diahann Carroll gave birth to her only child, Suzanne Kay, on September 9, 1960, in New York City. At the time, she was married to Monte Kay, a jazz producer and talent manager who had worked with artists like Miles Davis and Billie Holiday. Their relationship had started with deep admiration. Both were ambitious, creative, and highly driven. But behind the scenes, the marriage was strained from early on. Diahann later said she experienced difficult labor, and Suzanne's birth was both physically exhausting and emotionally overwhelming. She was just 25 years old, already a rising star, and now a first-time mother. It was 1960, and Diahann was also juggling a pivotal moment in her career. That same year, she appeared in Paris Blues with Sidney Poitier and Paul Newman, cementing her reputation as a serious actress with screen presence and elegance. But off-screen, she was facing an entirely different role: mother, wife, and woman, trying to hold everything together. The marriage to Monty Kay didn't last. Despite their mutual respect, Diahan later admitted that their personalities clashed. She wanted stability. He was more bohemian and unpredictable. The couple divorced just a few years after Suzanne was born. Diahan took primary custody of her daughter, raising her largely on her own, while continuing to pursue a demanding career in television, film, and theater. And she didn't slow down. In the mid-1960s, Diahan starred in Claudine, a role that earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress. It was a powerful, emotional performance as a single mother of 6, trying to survive on welfare. Art imitated life, because at home, Diahan was a single mother too, balancing red carpets and press tours with school pickups and parenting. Suzanne grew up in New York and Los Angeles, often surrounded by artists, producers, and celebrities. She attended private schools and traveled frequently, but despite the glamour, she's described her childhood as structured and emotionally controlled. Years later, Suzanne would say, "My mother was everything the public thought she was: poised, polished, prepared." But that kind of perfection had a cost. Diahan demanded excellence, not just from herself, but from her daughter, too. There was little room for emotional vulnerability, and much of Suzanne's childhood was spent learning how to meet her mother's high standards. At the same time, Suzanne was witnessing her mother redefine what it meant to be a black woman in Hollywood. In 1968, when Diahan starred in Julia, it wasn't just a career milestone, it was a cultural earthquake. Diahan became the first black woman to lead a primetime TV show where her character wasn't a servant. She played Julia Baker, a widowed nurse raising her son. And every week, millions of Americans saw a new kind of family on screen. Back at home, Suzanne was watching that image take shape, while also living with the reality of a working mother under constant pressure. She once said, "My mother wasn't always emotionally available, but she showed me how to be resilient. She had to be. The world gave her no choice." As Suzanne Kay got older, she began carving her own path, quietly but intentionally. She was bright, driven, and observant. And while she admired her mother's success, Suzanne knew early on that she didn't want to be in front of the camera. She wanted to tell stories, but in her own way. She enrolled at Columbia University, where she studied journalism. After graduating, she went on to earn a master's degree in screenwriting from New York University's Tisch School of the Arts. Suzanne said later in time, "I wasn't trying to follow in my mother's footsteps. I was trying to find my own voice, and that started with writing." Her early career took off in media. Suzanne worked as a journalist, contributing to Essence magazine, and eventually joined CNN as an on-air reporter and producer. She reported on real-world issues, race, culture, politics, while keeping a low profile compared to her famous mother. In interviews, Suzanne has acknowledged the constant comparisons. People would meet me and say, "Oh, you're Diahann Carroll's daughter," and that would be all they saw. But I was never trying to be her. I respected her, but I also knew I had to build something that was mine. Throughout her 20s and 30s, Suzanne remained close to her mother, though their relationship, like many between strong women, had tension. Diahan was proud of Suzanne's intellect, her independence, but also had a hard time letting go of control. At the same time, Diahan's own career was experiencing a revival. In the 1980s, she joined the cast of Dynasty, playing Dominique Devereaux, the first glamorous black villainess on primetime soap television. It was a bold, powerful role that showed audiences a different side of Diahan, and it was a role she loved. While Diahan dazzled on screen, Suzanne was now building her own creative work behind the scenes. Eventually, she transitioned into film, co-founding a production company and developing projects that highlighted voices and cultures rarely represented in Hollywood. In 2004, Suzanne co-wrote and co-produced Cape of Good Hope, a South African film about connection, resilience, and identity. The film received international acclaim and marked Suzanne's quiet but undeniable arrival as a thoughtful global storyteller. She said in an interview, "Storytelling has always been about healing. It's how I process my own experience and try to give others a voice too." While Suzanne Kay spent most of her professional life out of the spotlight, her personal journey was just as rich and in many ways just as layered as her mother's. In the 1990s, Suzanne married Mark Bamford, a screenwriter and director. Their relationship was built not just on love, but on a shared creative purpose. Together, they told stories that centered on humanity, culture, and connection. During their marriage, they lived for a time in South Africa, where they co-wrote and co-produced the 2004 film Cape of Good Hope, a project inspired by their life abroad and their desire to explore themes of family and belonging. Together, Suzanne and Mark had 2 children, a daughter named Sydney Bamford and a son, August Bamford. With their births, Diahann Carroll became a grandmother, a role she approached with pride and grace. Suzanne said later in time, "Motherhood changed me. I became softer. I wanted my kids to feel safe, to be emotionally supported, in a way I sometimes didn't feel growing up." And if you are into classic Hollywood icons, amazing stories, and newly discovered insights, then hit that subscribe button. We are on our way to 10,000 subscribers, and your support will mean a lot to our channel. She was determined to break generational cycles, not by rejecting the past, but by evolving from it. Though Suzanne and Mark eventually divorced, they remained committed to co-parenting Sydney and August. Suzanne continued raising her children with intention, emphasizing compassion, creativity, and identity. As she built her life as a mother, her relationship with her own mother began to shift. The sharp edges of their earlier years gave way to something gentler, more mutual. Diahan, who had once ruled her world with control and perfection, allowed more vulnerability into their bond. And Suzanne, now a mother herself, understood more deeply what her own mother had been up against, especially as a Black woman navigating fame, motherhood, and personal survival in the spotlight. During Diahan's final years, while quietly battling breast cancer, Suzanne was by her side. She became her caregiver, her advocate, and her emotional anchor. Diahann Carroll passed away on October 4th, 2019, at the age of 84, at her home in Los Angeles. It was peaceful, private, family only. Suzanne later reflected. She was still evolving, still trying to figure things out. That was the part people didn't see. She never stopped growing. Today, Suzanne carries her mother's story forward, but in her own voice and through her own work. And for Diahann Carroll, who once felt she had to be flawless to be accepted, her greatest legacy may not be in Hollywood, but in the daughter and grandchildren who learned how to be real. Today, Suzanne Kay continues to live a life rooted in creativity, privacy, and intention. She's still writing, still developing projects, and still working behind the scenes, telling stories that matter, particularly those that center Black women and underrepresented voices. She splits her time between the U.S. and South Africa, where part of her heart and much of her inspiration remains. Her children, Sydney and August, are now young adults, raised with the lessons of 2 powerful women, one who shattered Hollywood ceilings and another who quietly built her own world from the ground up. Suzanne has rarely courted the spotlight, and she's never used her last name to open doors. Instead, she's chosen to do the harder work, building her name, her craft, and her family in the shadow of a legacy that still looms large. She said in an interview, "I'm proud to be her daughter, but I'm also proud to be someone she never had the chance to be, free to live with a little less fear." And maybe that's the quiet brilliance of this story. Diahann Carroll gave us glamour, strength, and history. Suzanne Kay gave us perspective, healing, and legacy. And together they remind us that every icon is also someone's mother. Every family has its triumphs and its scars. And sometimes the most powerful legacy isn't the one the world sees. It's the one that gets passed down in the silences, the reconciliations, and the next generation's freedom to choose differently. So what do we really inherit from the people who raised us? Is it their success, their struggle, or the stories they never got to finish? Suzanne Kay may have been born in the shadow of a star, but the life she built, quiet, thoughtful, and honest, shines in its own way. And maybe that's the real legacy, not repeating the past, but choosing to grow beyond it. What would you carry forward if your mother was a legend? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoy stories that go beyond the spotlight, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss a story behind the fame.